Hello and welcome back to the Youth Education Project's mini lecture series. Today we're going to be speaking about the religious freedoms. As always, the learning packs are available on the Human Rights Pulse website. These learning packs include lesson plans and PowerPoints that can be used by teachers or any individuals who just want to learn more about this range of human rights topics that we create resources for. So let's jump into our mini lecture today. As I said, it's going to be on religious freedoms. So the lesson objectives for this pack, this is what students or any individuals can expect to kind of gauge from the packs. The first one is we're actually going to talk about what religious freedoms are, because there are certain restrictions on religious freedoms, despite all the human rights protections imposed by states. Secondly, we're going to talk about the debate surrounding religious dress in the workplace. So this is actually our case study for today's topic. As many of you will know, we include either a case study or a number of case studies for each topic, and it just helps gauge or get a better understanding of what it's really about. The third learning objective is to understand the importance of religious freedom. And the final learning objective is students will form their own view on the recent decision from the Court of Justice of the European Union. So, of course, as usual in the learning packs, there's a number of different exercises that students will use to supplement and develop their knowledge, because they'll be leading the tasks. So let's jump straight into what a religious freedom is. So freedom of religion is a human right that supports the freedom of a community or an individual to practice their religion. And so this will include the right to hold a religious belief, to change a religious belief, to express a religious belief, and not to hold a religious belief at all. So the United Nations Human Rights Convention noted that the right to freedom of religion is far-reaching and profound. And the committee also stated that it encompasses freedom of thought on all matters of personal conviction and the commitment to religion and belief, whether manifested individually or in community with others. So in any states which proclaim to have religious freedom, those four factors will be at the core of that. So any individual will possess those rights to hold, change and express their religious beliefs, or indeed to not hold a religious belief at all. So the next slide is we're going to speak about some relevant international law. So this is legislation which protects the right to religious freedoms. We're also going to speak about a few limitations, because even in states which proclaim to protect this ability to hold, change and express your religious beliefs, there are potentially some limitations on that right. So the first is your Universal Declaration of Human Rights, specifically Article 18, which states that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. The second is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So this treaty, and it's not the only treaty of its kind, there are other international treaties, also reaffirms the right of freedom of religion. And it also has a certain definition for it, which is freedom of thought, conscience and religion, just like in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also freedom from coercion. So that's the freedom, it's similar to the freedom to not hold a religious belief, but it's more detailed than that. It's the freedom to not be coerced, or like manipulated, forced, pushed into either holding a religious belief or not holding a religious belief. The final thing to note is certain limitations. States have the right to prescribe certain limitations into law if they believe that it's necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. So this would be specific to, for example, we're going to speak about religious dress. That's a more controversial issue, because it could be argued that, religious dress doesn't really have any impact on the general public. Another thing that comes to mind is things like female genital mutilation, which some people claim to be necessary to their religion or their culture. That's one that's not so controversial because obviously that does have an impact on the greater public, specifically the health of young women and girls. So we're going to talk about the case study now. We're specifically talking about the issue of religious dress in Germany, which came up in 2021. So this was a case that was brought to the Court of Justice of the European Union, specifically after employers refused to allow their employees to wear headscarves, for example, the hijab. And these headscarves were worn strictly for religious purposes. So in July of 2021, the Court of Justice of the European Union held that employers actually can limit expression of religious belief in the workplace where there is a genuine need to present a neutral image towards customers or to prevent social disputes. Now, of course, this was seen to be very problematic. We're going to look into the arguments for and against this judgment in a little bit. But of course, this was quite problematic because if we look back at the previous criteria of when a state can limit religious freedoms, it's mostly around public safety and health. Of course, we have the morals, and it's hard to see how this impacts that. So this judgment means that employees can ban their workers from wearing any form of religious dress. And of course, the decisions caused significant debate, which we're going to look into now. So first, we're going to look at the arguments of the court, so their rationale. So the CJEU said that such prohibition is not discriminatory as long as it applies equally to all expressions of religious belief. They also stated that this decision may be justified by the employer's need to present itself in a neutral manner to customers or to prevent social conflicts. And finally, presenting as neutral has been used in previous decisions worldwide to allow for employers to ban their workers from wearing religious dress. So the general argument seems to be that it won't be discriminatory as long as it applies equally to all expressions of religious belief. But the question is, it doesn't apply equally to all people because, for example, as a Christian, many Christians aren't required or don't believe that they're required by their religion to express it in a certain way, whereas for Islam, it's more common for the religious belief to be expressed outwards, of course, not always. But there is that question of how it can apply equally when not all religions have that same outward expression. And for many women, they see it part of their practicing life as a Muslim woman is to cover their hair, and to have this taken away from them in their workplace. It's hard to see how this couldn't be considered as discriminatory. So we are going to look now at more arguments against the decision. So a lot of people claim that the CJEU's decision actually harms employees' rights, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and women's rights. And that's quite an important note. It also relates to what I was just saying with in Islam, men don't cover their hair, whereas the women do wear the hijab. So it also discriminates against women more than it discriminates against men. The second argument is that despite the argument the ban allows for workplaces to present as neutral, it's been argued that this decision would disproportionately impact Muslim women. Again, that's as I've just been saying. And finally, Human Rights Watch stated that the court's reasoning that allowing religious dress could harm a business's ability to operate rests on the flawed logic that a client's objections to the employees wearing religious dress can legitimately trump the employee's rights. So that is, of course, a big point. A lot of people have criticised this decision to kind of cater towards people who would object to someone expressing a certain religion, and should this be placed above the actual employee's rights? So this is a really interesting case. It's quite problematic, and it's something that the students should get the opportunity to really investigate further and come up with their own sort of arguments for and against. So that's all for today's mini lecture. As usual, we've got all our social media available for anyone to get in contact if you have any questions or if you have any ideas of any other topics that we should cover. We've got all our social media linked there, and we also have our email address. And finally, that's the website link for where you can find this education pack and all the other education packs that we have created free of charge for anyone to use if they'd like to learn more about these topics that we're exploring. So thank you for joining us today. As I said, please do get in touch if you've got any ideas or any questions. We'll be happy to answer them. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.